Welcome to Expressions of Leadership, a podcast showcasing the many faces of leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. From teachers to artists to C-suite leaders, we explore how people own their authentic leadership, celebrate their triumphs, overcome challenges, and share lessons learned. In today's episode, we are excited to welcome Brent Green, the visionary behind Green Art Landscape Designs. As the founder of this award-winning, nationally recognized firm, Brent has spent nearly 30 years crafting breathtaking landscapes that will serve as seamless extensions to his clients' homes. His expertise has attracted a diverse clientele, from high-profile celebrities like Lionel Richie, Nia Long, and Ozzy Osbourne, to dedicated professionals in his local community. A skilled horticulturalist and landscape designer, Brent specializes in transforming ordinary backgrounds and front yards into serene garden sanctuaries, blending beauty, functionality, and artistry to create outdoor spaces of remarkable distinction. Brent, so happy to have you here on the Expressions of Leadership podcast.
Happy to be here, Michele. Thank you.
I'd love to know what inspired your journey into landscaping.
You know, it's very interesting. My last name, ironically, is Green. So, but when I was a little kid, probably 5 years old, my grandmother, my mother's mother, would come out from Dallas. My mom's from Texas. Both my parents are from Texas, and my grandmother would come out and she would garden in my parents' backyard and grow tomatoes. And she was around quite a bit when I was a really little kid, and she loved to garden. And she was a major gardener back in Texas at her own home. And so she taught me to grow tomatoes and collard greens and turnip greens and peppers and all these different wonderful things in our garden at home. And what was cool about it, she would ultimately leave and go back to Texas. She'd have like a 2-week or a 3-week trip here, then she'd leave and go back. But she would brief me on how to care for this stuff to make it actually, be a harvestable crop. And so I'd raise it till it was time to harvest it, and then we would eat them at our dinner table for salads and that type of thing. And so I was growing vegetables for our dinner table by the time I was 6, with the help of my grandma.
Wow.
And learning all of that. And I just really got into it because I got so much cool feedback from my parents and from my parents' friends. They all thought it was the coolest thing that this little kid could grow this stuff. And so I did that. And as time went on, my parents saw that I was so into plants, that they began giving me a little allowance as I did chores around the house. And my allowance was to go to a local nursery on Saturdays, and I had $5 to spend, and I would be able to grab little plants and try different things. And the owners of the nursery were a Japanese family, really wonderful family, the Nishimoras, and their daughter, who was probably 20 at the time, worked at the nursery, and she took a liking to me because I knew all the names of all these plants. I was a little African-American kid with a 70s afro, and I'd walk in, I'd just start naming things by their botanical names. I'd be like, that's a Syzygium paniculatum, and that's a Cupaniopsis anacardioides. And she'd be like, who is this kid? And after that, she and I were just buddies. I mean, literally, she'd see me walk into the nursery, and she'd drop what she was doing. She'd run over to me, and for the next hour or so, I'd walk around and talk to her about plants. And if I had $5 to spend, she would make it 10 by giving me extra plants and that type of thing. So that's pretty much how it started. So I began taking care of my parents' yard, and it was the greenest yard in the neighborhood, and all the other neighbors kind of envied it. So I had little side jobs on the weekends, taking care of other people's plants, and that's how I kind of started doing gardening. And then went on to Cal Poly. My dad's a retired judge, wanted to be a lawyer, but my dad says, no, you've got to do plants because you're really good at it. And it was the best advice he ever gave me. And I applied to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and California Polytechnic State University, Pomona. I got into both of them, and ended up going to San Luis Obispo and studied horticulture, and had the best 4 years of my life up there with all these other like-minded plant nerds that I didn't know existed until I got there. So it was very cool.
After you graduated, how did you start working in the industry?
So here's what I did. When I was looking to go to college, my dad really wanted me to do the research. He's like, son, I want you to get the Yellow Pages and find a landscape design firm looks interesting in the Yellow Pages. Call them and tell them that you want to go to school for this, and find out where to go and see if you can interview with them and see what they say about the industry. So I did that, and I found a company called Party and Fleming Landscaping. They were based on PCH out in Malibu, and they were kind enough to take me on and let me come into their firm as a young person before college and talk to them. And they directed me to go to college at Cal Poly. They said, you got to go to Cal Poly, either one of the two, but apply to both. And that's what I did. And when I got in, after I finished, I came out back into LA. And I think what I had to learn when I was up at Cal Poly was there's so many facets to the green industry. Like there are people that grow plants for nursery, there are landscape designers, there are landscape architects. Um, there are people that do urban forestry management. There are people that do viticulture, which is the production of grapes and that type of thing. Fruit science. I mean, there's so many branches of the field. No pun intended. Branches of the field of horticulture. I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And coming from Los Angeles, with this wonderful climate that we have, and really being acutely aware of the fact that most of what we see growing here in domestic landscapes is non-native.
Hmm.
LA's very much like the people that live here. There's so many people that come from other places because our weather's great. It's a great place to live and live outside most of the year because we don't get the snow in the greater LA basin. It's generally mild. So my whole idea was to come back to LA and design outdoor residential spaces for homes that blur the line of interior and exterior and connect the two really well together. And that's how I got into it.
Has working with nature influenced your leadership philosophy? And if so, how?
Very much so. In fact, I lead by talking to my clients. Well, even in my own lifestyle, I own a home here in Mid City. It's a small house. It's not a big house. It's 1,100 square foot Spanish 1923 bungalow. But upon buying my house 21 years ago, there were no real connections with the outdoor space, and the outdoor space was the biggest part of my property. So I said to myself, if I blur the lines of interior and exterior, I don't have to add on square footage built form on the place. I can actually create these privacy walls in my outdoor space and make it be a space that I can live inside and outside with bifold doors and privacy walls that block out my neighbors, shade structures like pergolas, trees that give me shade different times of the year, lighting, water features to attract birds and that type of thing. So I've done that in my space. Which actually made it into Sunset Magazine in 2009. They gave me 5 pages, which I was very honored to be in that magazine.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Now, landscaping requires vision, seeing potential before transformation. How does this relate to leadership and long term vision for you?
But in the way of leadership, for me, it's like the seeds you plant today will reap wonderful things for you tomorrow. And so, for example, when I did my garden, I mean, I was on such a budget. It was my first house, and I was a young family, just started. My kid was 3 years old at the time. She's 24 now, but um, I had to put so much money into fixing up my 1923 bungalow. I had to really put in small plants with a really good design, with the idea that they would grow into what I intended for them to grow into, which is my privacy walls, my shade structures, my my landscaping. And so I led with a plan to be very intent on planting deliberately in the way I planted and where I planted certain species and you know knowing that they were going to ultimately grow into what I intended as leading the space to be a different space than I had originally purchased when I bought the house. And
Mhm.
it took some time, but I had to be very intentional in making sure that I maintained them and trained them and curated the garden so that it would ultimately be what I ultimately had thought that it should be. But taking the lead to actually start it took a lot of work over and years to let it mature and to train it into maturity.
Because of your vast experience in landscape design and botany, you can easily see the lush end product of what your work will look like. But that may not be as easy for your clients. So, how do you enlist clients to join you and buy into your long term vision?
You know what I do? Sometimes I go and meet with them in their space, and I like to walk through their homes on the interior and kind of see how they live in the home. And then exit the home into the space that I'm designing for them and try to really get them to understand what's potentially, a possibility of connecting the interior with the exterior. If there's no large door, maybe we give them the idea of creating a large door space where it just kind of flows inside, outside. Um, and get people into the mindset of thinking about their backyard space as an outdoor room, literally an outdoor room. It's not just a pretty place that you look at from your window. It's square footage that you can entertain in. You can, have take a nap back there. You can have a water feature like a jacuzzi or a pool. Lighting. Just to me, it's so taking the leadership to really show my clients. I show them in pictures. I show them also. I invite clients to my own garden because I live in a pretty modest house. Some of the clients that I designed for live in pretty opulent houses and still don't use the grounds the way that I use the grounds in my house. And so once they see my house and the way I've blurred the lines of the interior and exterior, they're sold. They're like, well, whatever you did here, do it for me. I love this. And that's one of the ways I get people to come in and do it. But it's really just really showing people the potential for their outdoor spaces and living in those outdoor spaces and really being, deliberate and trying to direct them to that realization.
And how do you incorporate the client's ideas or desires into the design vision?
It's such a personal statement of the person who lives in the house. I think what they rely on me for is my horticultural expertise. Most people are not going to do all the research to grow, 40 different varieties of plants on their property, but they expect me as a professional to be knowledgeable so that I can, give them what they're asking for or what I'm selling them on. Um, and you know, if they like the color red, if that makes them happy, if they've got some connection with whatever color, whatever feeling, or if the interior of their house has certain jewel tones or whatever that may be in the inside that makes them happy, I encourage them to, bring that into the exterior space so that it really does connect the interior with the exterior. And so that's the way I kind of lead them to it. But I give them total ideas about what's possible. Most people never think about what's possible with an outdoor space. They're like, oh, it's a yard to keep my trash cans. It's a yard to keep my dog. It's a yard, occasionally, I may have people over and we'll hang out there, but it's not really the priority place. I mean, and once I've designed for most people, they use their yards like they never imagined that they could. They've got heaters out there. They've got, like I said, music out there. They've got water features, lighting. They can use them day or night. And I'm really big on privacy walls, just because here in urban LA, we generally are next door to somebody or somebody is behind us. And so, how do you block those people out so that they're not looking into your outdoor room? And it's
Mhm.
never some, fortress like, like keep out type thing. I like to do it with greenery. So it's a polite way to kind of block people. So if you have a building back there that's a two-story, maybe plant a tree in your yard so that they can't look through the tree into your yard, but it's still a pretty thing for them to look at from their place, but it gives you the privacy from your place. You know what I'm saying? And so
Mhm.
just I really have fun with every unique space that I work on because they're all different. They all have different orientations of light or different sizes or different views. Some of them have views where you're looking out over a city, and that's always fun too, or looking at the ocean.
So, beyond just the yard itself, you were considering the whole landscape around the home, including the terrain, the potential view, neighbors, and how it all fits into the community overall.
Exactly. In fact, for example, my neighborhood case in point, I'm in the heart of LA in mid city off of a busy street called La Brea. It's one of the biggest thoroughfares here in the area, the north south street. And I'm near the intersection of La Brea Avenue and the Santa Monica Freeway, which is another big highway. It's a highway. And I live just northwest of that in this neighborhood that had very few street trees when I purchased my home. And yet it was a 1920s area. So if somebody had planted trees in the 20s, we should have had a canopy that would have been amazing, with older trees and that type of thing. But nobody thought to do it. We had a few palm trees around that were older, but they didn't really provide a lot of screening or sound barrier from the freeway or improve the oxygen level from the traffic and the exhaust that comes from La Brea Avenue and the freeway. So my mission when I was 35 and bought the house was to not just do my own home, but to start introducing trees into the neighborhood street by street. So I did my whole street, and I do them the trees on my birthday. So when I bought my house, I was 35. So on my 35th birthday, I planted 35 street trees in front of people's homes on my block who, would wanted them and wanted to water them and take care of them. And, I got people that were into the idea of that. And then some people didn't want it the first year, but by the second year, the first year trees were so pretty, people were asking me, "So you're going to do that again? I want a tree this time." And so those people wanted trees. So the first 3 years I was here, I did 3 consecutive years of birthday trees. And those are the oldest trees here in my neighborhood. Those were planted 2003, 2004, 2005. So we've got the shadiest street in the neighborhood because they're the oldest trees. And then after this street was done, I fanned out and did other streets around the neighborhood. But what it's done, literally, it's it's made the homes, when you drive into our neighborhood, it's got this very park-like feel now. So the homes set among the green of the streets. And so you drive down the street and you see nice houses, but you see trees that kind of frame the houses, and they canopy across the street to give you shade. So that helps with the heat island effect where the street just bakes in sun. You don't have that now because the trees cover the street. And then the really wonderful added plus is the sound of the freeway. When I bought my house, the freeway was, now it's,
Mm.
all the trees muffle it, and they muffle it. And I've been in this house, like I said, almost 22 years, and I can, it sounds totally different than when I bought the house. And it's the trees. And I'm so
Mm.
proud of the fact that, I took the leadership to do it in my neighborhood because, I had heard from neighbors that they had been trying to get the city to do trees and nobody would do it. And some people just didn't understand what could be done. And when I led people with an idea and they believed in what I was pitching, they bought into it. And I'm thankful that they did because it's changed the neighborhood, and I'm really proud of the fact that it has.
It sounds like there is a real balance you're looking to strike between aesthetics and functionality in landscape design. How does that compare to balancing vision and execution in leadership?
Now that's a good question. I think that a vision and any kind of leadership, if you're standing here and you're trying to get over there and you're determined to get over there, there should be some course in your mind of how to get there. And I think, especially if you don't want to, beat your head against a rock constantly trying to figure it out, there should be some deliberate line and then some idea of how to achieve it over time. And so for me, taking the leadership of asking the neighbors if you wanted a tree, because if you want a tree, and then really coming up with actual varieties that would work long term so that they wouldn't become a problem for the neighborhood. They wouldn't buckle the sidewalks. They wouldn't litter. I try to do, trees that didn't, produce copious amounts of litter. Some trees do, some more than others. Every tree has whatever it has. But I was trying to be very deliberate about that, about drought tolerance, because here in LA, we are in a desert and we don't always get the rainfall that we, some years we get it, some years we don't. So I wanted trees that were sustainable. And I wanted something, that I could lead, I could instigate planting, because these are, in my lifetime, it's made a beautiful mark on this neighborhood, but long after I'm gone, I hope it continues to. And I didn't want to plant something that would create a problem for somebody long after I'm gone.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more insights from Brent Green. Stay with us. Love what you're hearing? Hit that follow button wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And be sure to connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. We're back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and we're joined today by visionary landscaper Brent Green. Let's now turn to leadership and teamwork. Brent, what parallels do you see between nurturing a garden and nurturing a team?
It's a really good question, Michelle. I think if you get the right palette or ingredients or the right group, and say you have 5 different plants that you're working with to create an outdoor space, 5 different varieties, and then you have 5 people on a team. If you look at the salient, um, I guess, whatever that individual is capable of, or as part of the team, and you use that to the team's advantage, because everybody's got something. For
Mhm.
example, if somebody's a great tech person on your team. You put them on that because I'm not a good tech person, but other people are. And so, for example, that type of thing, I think it's really looking at the potential for what can be and using the tools that you have available to you. For me, it's plants in a palette of plants, and LA is really rich in a plant palette. There's so many things that grow here that I can dream in ideas and plant species to achieve a vision, which is an outdoor room experience, for my clients. And for example, some people have total shade in their yard, and so I choose plants that are that. Because if I put plants that like sun, they wouldn't fare very well in that. So the plant palette that I have, I have to really be very directive in what I use so that I don't, waste time or that it doesn't fail, for example. And so I think very similar with a team. I think that if you're working as a team, everything should work together. People should work together, and again, rely on the people that do what they do, or the plants that are screening plants. Those block out, while other things that are more colorful give color in the foreground, or
Hmm.
that grows as a tree, gives you a canopy that gives you shade, on your team, whoever those people are that are the best at what they do, you work that to your advantage so that the team is a viable team that works together. And I think that that's a good way to compare leadership in, say, landscape design and with a team.
And you have an extensive cross functional team between your admin, the gardeners, the hardscape contractors, etc. People who are really critical to making that vision come to life.
That's exactly right. Through the years, I've actually really been fortunate enough to meet so many wonderful contractors that I bring into my projects as subcontractors, masons, people that build structures, overhang structures. I have a vision of what I'd like, and then they execute it by actually being able to build it. And we work together really well by working the space and making the space be visually and functionally what it should be. Um, uh, I'm grateful for my team. I'm grateful for my employees that plant the plants. I've got two employees. One, Florenzio, has been with me now for 28 years. He's literally watched my daughter grow up, and then Galdino's been with me now for 19 years. Those are my two top employees, my two top foremen on my teams that I have. And that group, I mean, they're like family to me. We all think the same way because we worked together for so long, and so it's fun. We find it to be very fun.
Knowing that an engaging and positive workplace culture plays a key role in delivering high quality work and driving a company's success, how do you cultivate that kind of culture at Green Art Landscape Designs?
It's a really great question. I have my guys all in green shirts because we are Green Art. It's the Green Art team. When I first started my company, I didn't have anybody in shirts. The guys kind of came in what they wore and that type of thing. But I started thinking, we do green, so as much green as we can have. So I got the green shirts. Our trucks have green logo. It's a real play on green because it's Green Art. That's what we do. So they feel like they're part of a team because they wear the shirts. We have hats to match. And we all get along as a general rule. I mean, it's a small team. I mean, I have a team. My field I've got 12 people in the field and two people in my office and me. And so it's not a big operation. We do a lot of work for the size of the team. It's not a small operation, but it's not a big operation. But it's an intimate, getting to know a group, and it's an intimate group of people that work well together. And as far as quality and all of that, again, because we've designed so many of these spaces in uniquely different settings, and we go back regularly and maintain them. My crews really like the fact that we get it right the first time as we install things, so that we're not having to repair a bunch of stuff later as we're back doing the maintenance. And
Mhm.
my crews seem to appreciate that aspect, and we work well together. We call each other on stuff. If something doesn't look right, we go, hey, maybe we should fix this and do this different. And we don't get our egos in the way. We fix it. And again, because we're a team and we've had a few people that are no longer with us, that moved on to other jobs and that type of thing. And we've got another new people then on our team that have been, exceptional, and everybody's added their bit to it. And again, like I had said earlier, as far as leading a team, look at what people's salient capable attributes are, and work with that as a team leader so that you can really build your leadership and team and your organization.
In both leadership and landscaping, that adaptability is crucial. How does adaptability show up in your work?
Landscape for me, it grows and it's changing and it's seasonal and it's living. And if it doesn't have the right nutrients or the right soil, or some pest comes in and eats all the leaves off your ficus bingivita or whatever, just at the end of the day, you've got to be mindful of all the other things that can potentially affect it as it is maturing and growing. And so that's all part of maintenance and leading it to be what it's intended to be and caring for those situations as they come up. In fact, it's been interesting in my 30 years, 30 plus years now, there have been plant varieties that were the most bulletproof plants, never had any pest or anything. Then one day some plague came through and just wiped out. Like oleander here in LA is a variety that you used to see everywhere. You barely see them. There was a plague that came through and pretty much wiped them all gone. And people used them generously in places like Palm Springs as screens. And they had to really come up with a different screen because they were gone. Like in a season, they were gone. And so they started adapting with other things that were favorable, different look, but the goal was to still maintain privacy. And you've got to be ready to leap when something happens that calls for your uh, I guess dexterity.
Speaking of dexterity, how do you handle unexpected obstacles that come up?
I what do I do? There's so many things. I because trees will do what they do. I mean, I've had a couple of my street trees actually that were not supposed to be root problem trees. The roots became kind of surface. And so I had to kind of read up and, some of the sidewalks had a few cracks. I had to kind of read up and kind of figure out, okay, what do I need to do? So I dug down. I actually educated myself on what they call root barriers. And so certain varieties now I use a root barrier when I plant the tree. So the roots are forced to go down. So I never have to worry about that variety of tree doing that again on an if so maybe if it's gonna do it or if it's not gonna do it, And so um I think educating myself, experience, also um, trial and error sometimes too. I mean, for example, and I'm not trying to just trial and error for my clients, but there are certain times I'll plant plants that were supposed to do one thing and they did something else. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I can use that in this application now. And I didn't think that was even possible with this variety of plants, but this is cool. And, just it's really fun. It's really fun. And because it's a living, growing, changing thing, when plants are happy in their setting and doing what you intended for them to do, that's always a real feather in my cap because I don't want to just crank out widgets in landscaping. I really want it to be a personal um, design for my clients, and I want every job, every again because of the exposure, the soil, the client, every job is different, and so I'm acutely aware of that.
Can you share a time when something went awry on a project and how you handled that?
Um, yes, let's see, on a design, I can think of this. I had, we had planted a bamboo hedge for a client. We were blocking a four-story apartment complex in Hollywood. And this particular, it was the old Samuel Goldwyn estate, and it had been there long before they built all these condos and things around it. But my client was restoring this place, and we planted these bamboo to block that building. That was the fastest thing and the only thing that we could think of that we could plant that would do that. We found out, I mean, it did the job, it blocked it, but it rained down copious amounts of litter. And it it also had a bunch of squirrels in it that would throw things down, and it became, problematic to have patio and seating areas near this stuff because it was constantly rained down with debris and litter and that type of thing. So I designed a series of pergolas and structures for that area, and we put screening up and all of that, so it still maintained an aesthetic. We didn't want to rip the plants down because they had done a job that was a very important job. I mean, you had 40 windows of 40 different units that would look down at you if we didn't have that screen up there. So they achieved what we our ultimate goal, but the litter was a problem. So I had to alter the patio below by putting in some netting, some screens so it could catch the litter, and then set up a program where periodically we go up there and collect the litter and take it away. And so and I guess that would be an example of adapting, because again, nature is going to do what it does, and so, you know, we're as a person using plants from nature in a domestic urban setting, I've got to be very mindful of and try not to, you know, have a faux pas where I use the wrong thing. I really try to be very deliberate, but occasionally things do happen, and you have to adapt and then weigh your pros and cons and your options.
And what did you learn from that experience?
I learned that there's gardens change just like children grow up. The little baby crib that I started out with my kid here when she was 3, she's a grown woman now. Gardens change, and as it changes, you can adapt. That pergola that I installed in that last scenario that I said, it ended up being a really nice architectural feature that warmed the garden and made it more intimate in a way that you couldn't even envision without the initial bamboo that we before it was planted. I didn't even think about that because there was no need for a pergola. But once that bamboo littered and I needed something to cover it, by putting that pergola in there, I felt like it really added a lot to the space visually. My client thought the same thing, and it became this really picturesque, piece of architecture in this now greened out space that just added to it um, enormously. And sometimes it's even things like people are allergic to certain things, and they don't know that they're allergic to them until we plant them. And after a season, they're like, I sneeze all the time when this thing blooms, and I have to adapt. Sometimes I've had to remove stuff. I've had that happen a couple of times. Where
Mhm.
somebody was allergic to an olive tree when it fruited, when it flowered, and so again, being the leader or the lead to curate the landscaping, over time, and to be there 4 times a year with my crew doing the detailed maintenance and that type of thing. I can spot problems. I can talk to my client. I can, find out from them what they're really enjoying about the garden, or if there are things that are a problem, I can talk to them about that too. And as the leader, it's up to me to come up with ideas or different scenarios that can make it better for them. But again, my ultimate goal is to try to get it right the first time so that it just really grows in. After 20 years of watching something grow, you're like, it did exactly what I wanted it to do. And if it's a 20-year-old tree, it should be substantial enough now that you don't want to take it down. It's actually, giving you the shade or blocking the telephone pole or giving you privacy, that type of thing.
Let's take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with more thoughtful reflections from our guest, Brent Green. Are you looking to connect with an audience passionate about leadership, growth, and success? Become a sponsor of Expressions of Leadership and align your brand with inspiring conversations that make an impact. Contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com to explore sponsorship opportunities. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. My special guest today is Brent Green. Brent, as a leader, how do you stay ahead of trends and innovations in landscaping?
That's a good question because I'm a plant nerd. I read a lot. I read a lot of plant books. I'm on the internet looking at different things. I'm such a plant person that I belong to a few Facebook groups for specific varieties of plants. There's a plant called staghorn fern that I'm wild about. I raised them. And there's a Facebook group for that. It's global. So people post pictures of their staghorn ferns in Malaysia or in Tahiti or wherever they live, or here in LA or whatever. And they use them in different applications. And so I've learned a lot of potential for what's out there, and I'm always kind of looking to see what's possible, especially for small spaces. I mean, as urban, gets more densely packed and populated, people have less outdoor space. Even in a nice climate like LA, that's becoming harder to achieve because people have maybe a little balcony or they have a small space, but you can still have a green space out there. And so how do I use plants in that capacity to achieve a mini garden that's still an extension of the interior, but using plants that fit the scale of that small space rather than going big on a big yard. Like if you have an opportunity to do a big yard, then you have the space to do it. But I don't always have that opportunity. So I guess the question, you know, the trends. I'm always visually looking to see what people are doing. I'm also, as you know conservation. People want, edible gardens now. People want things that they can eat, and grow, organically in their gardens. I introduce some of those things now because I see that that's, I mean, at first I think my goal was all aesthetic, but it's evolved over the years. It's some of it's edible, some of it's, um, noise reduction. So I had fountains in to these green spaces so that you don't hear the freeway. If it's a few blocks away, you hear the fountain or the birds, you plant things that attract birds and hummingbirds and that type of thing. Um, I just think it's anytime that I think about leading, I think of being just extremely deliberate in my execution and in, the ultimate goal of what I'm trying to achieve. And that's with my team, that's with, the designs, that's with keeping the client happy. Um, and again, sustainability is a big part of that. You want something that even long after I'm gone or the client sells the house, whoever would inhabit the house, they can maintain it and it's not some complicated thing that nobody can care for or live with. I think that all of those things come into my mind as I you know lead my team to build these outdoor room spaces that Green Art creates.
When I'm in nature, I feel inspired and revitalized, and I'm often in awe of its resilience and adaptability and its power of steady growth. Mother Nature always seems to have something to teach us. What lessons have you learned from nature?
Nature's probably the most perfect thing there is. I know that's a strong statement to make, but things change with the seasons. The sun goes high in the summertime and it goes low in the winter. Everything there's a purpose for everything in nature. I think that that's really actually true. And even when pests come in, they feed off of other pests, or there's some symbiotic relationship potentially, between most things in nature, good and bad. Um, I've learned over the years to be adaptable to that because it can be a little unpredictable sometimes. Like I said about infestations of insects and that type of thing that can change the whole um, you know look of a garden or look of a variety of plant. They can change. So I've learned to be adaptable. I've also learned to uh, you know for example, I plant a tree in my backyard or in a client's backyard, and the day that I plant it, it's still a very sunny backyard because it's a small tree. After 10 years, the tree's a big tree, so there's a lot of shade in the yard. If I had roses and colorful flowers in that sunny garden, those might not do as well now in the shade. So I've got to adapt the underplantings now to something else that is more sustainable because it's shade instead of sun that I started with. And so it's all of those type of things. I think that you know it gives you an opportunity to really, sometimes rethink a space. Even if the kids grow up now and the kids are teenagers, it's a different space. So maybe let the hedges grow a little higher so that there's a little bit more privacy, so that loud music. If the kids want to throw a party, it's a very different space than when they were 3 years old. You know what I'm saying? It just, I guess my answer is, I really try to just bend like the wind does with like trees bend in the wind with nature. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I mean, the wind's gonna come, you don't know how strong it's gonna be, but as it does, the trees are engineered to kind of move with it. And I think the landscape designs that I come up with and ultimately install and help grow over the years into their finished product, you've been with the wind, as things in nature change, or even just things in the city change, you work with it. But you also learn what's more sustainable and some things aren't as sustainable, and you learn that too. And then there are other introductions that come in that you didn't even know existed because maybe they didn't exist when you planted that 20 years ago, but now they do. And so
Mhm.
I bring things in now that actually answer the questions of certain problems. And there's artificial turf. There wasn't artificial turf when I first started doing landscape design, and the stuff that was out there it looked so unnatural that nobody really used it. It's gotten
Mhm.
so natural looking now that in a shady location, it can be a floor that's soft.
Hmm.
Where you can't grow real lawn. You can actually have this with a lush surrounding landscape with this artificial turf that looks real and it's functional, looks great, with the plantings and the whole thing. And so that's an adaptation that, over the years, you know, as I've built my designs, and led my crew and my team to achieve certain things, I've adapted based on what's been available to me.
So it's really that flexibility and adaptability and leaning into more sustainability.
That's the best way to say it. Honestly, just the way you said it, exactly.
We're going to take a brief pause. Up next, Brent reflects on his leadership legacy and the lasting mark he hopes to leave. Stay tuned. Great leadership starts with great culture. At the Forward Project, we help organizations transform their workplace culture and develop leaders who inspire, engage, and drive meaningful change. Ready to take your team to the next level? Visit www.theforwardproject.co to learn more. We are back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and we're here with our guest, Brent Green of Green Art Landscape Designs. Now, just as trees provide shade for future generations, great leaders leave a lasting impact. How do you view your leadership legacy?
I really would like to hope that I've left a legacy of leaving it better than I found it. Um, it's interesting. My neighborhood was it is urban. It's a very urban neighborhood. Los Angeles. It's one of the most urban cities in America. Traffic and spread out and a lot of concrete. A lot of buildings. Um, and I think growing up as an Angelino, we would take trips to the redwoods with my parents or some mountainous place like Big Bear or something like that. And you kind of feel like you get out of the city for a while and go do that. But in LA, LA was just a city. What I'd like to leave as a legacy, I think, from my belief, is the introduction of the right, well-placed greenery in this urban setting that has all these potential plant candidates that can achieve, all these wonderful things like privacy, aesthetic, um, fragrance, color, um, that people learn what's possible and continue with the movement of that. And street trees, people learn that, a canopy street is not just a pretty street, it's a functional street that protects you. It makes you feel, it calms you down. It psychologically makes you want to be in that space more than it would be just a street with no trees on it. I just really truly believe um, that I hope after I'm gone, all the trees that I've planted, add joy to people for years and years and years and continue to. And I hope people keep it up and keep that movement going because, I think the sustainability of it. I mean, if one person does it and then somebody continues the movement after that person's gone, then that's success. That people actually get it. They understand the importance of it. And, for me with the trees that I've planted, because I'm such a plant nerd, I had this idea that that's the answer to everything. And in my mind, it is. Some people didn't quite get it, but as people have seen it grow in, people are like, you know what? I'm moving to this neighborhood. I'll pay a lot of money to live here now because it looks a certain way. They didn't pay that before. So
Hmm.
just interesting how if you build it, people will come. And uh again, I'd like for my legacy to be just that. I took an idea and greened up an area of the city that made a difference in people's lives.
And that will continue to make a difference in the lives of generations to come.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm really proud of it. I really am.
Well, now we've reached the part of our show where we ask our guest one advice question and one fun question. Starting with the advice question, if you could give your younger self one piece of leadership advice, what would it be?
Good question. I think what I would tell my younger self is, you know, literally like before my dad and mom really sat me down and said, you've got to go to school for this because this is, I really wanted to be a lawyer. I kind of had this box checked that I had to be a professional, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, that I could garden on the weekend as a hobby. I didn't think I could really make a living doing this. And I'm here to tell you, I think God and the universe gives everybody something. I don't know what, whatever it is that excites you when you wake up in the morning. If you can figure out what that is and actually make a living doing it and make a difference in the world, that's success and that's a beautiful thing. And I think that what I would tell my younger self before, my parents really pushed me to go to college and study this, I think as a really young person, I would have had a whole college thing in mind from the beginning and been like, I'm going to college, and I would have thought that maybe in junior high and high school. I never really thought that I'd go to college and major in this until pretty much my junior, senior year at Palisades High School here in LA. But prior to that, I was thinking again, lawyer, all the different, things that could make my family money and be able to put food on the table, and then I would garden as a hobby. But when I began to think bigger about what was potentially, a goal with it, it became more clear to me what was possible, and it also became, more clear how I could help um, the environment in this great city that is LA, be just a more favorable place for all of us to live with greenery, and really just knowing what I know that it can add, pushing it and educating people on the importance of it and what's possible. And so that's I think I would tell my younger self to really, from the beginning, whatever it is, embrace it and continue to embrace it all the way through, and let your light shine.
Such great advice. And now for the fun question. If you could master any new musical instrument instantly, what would it be?
New, when you say new to me playing it,
Yeah.
the piano.
Why the piano?
I have one in the house because my daughter can play and she plays, and I love to hear it, but I've never been able to master it. I love the sound of the piano, and I think I'm always amazed at just how many keys it takes to make this harmony on the piano. Much like with the plant palettes that I use, it takes more than just one thing to make it be this viable, beautiful thing. And even leadership, a team takes more than one person to, be this viable group of people that actually get it done. And so the piano, all these harmonies and all these little blends of the keys that are played so melodically together and deliberate to create a sound, I would want to learn to play the piano. I think that that would be fun. In fact, I think I may do that. That's a bucket list.
Brent, thank you so much for joining us on the Expressions of Leadership show today. It's been a true pleasure hearing about your journey in landscaping and the leadership principles that guide your work, as well as the passion and care that you bring to everything that you do. Your insights were both thoughtful and inspiring, and we're grateful you took the time to share your stories behind the beautiful spaces that you create and also your expertise with us.
A pleasure. It really is. Thank you so much, Michelle, for including me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you being part of the conversation, and we hope that you're walking away with some inspiration of your own. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you soon. Take care.